I'd like to talk about conceptual art, and I'd like to start with a historic perspective. Certainly it's attributed to Marcel Duchamp, and I have some slides I'd like to show. This actually is Duchamp's fountain, which was a urinal that he entered into an art show, and it says R. Mutt on the side, and he entered that as another artist. And this was a show where nothing could be rejected, and in fact this piece was rejected. It's interesting that they would talk about commodification of art, because a lot of that Dada work that Duchamp was a part of at the time really was a reaction to art as a object or as something of significance. And certainly we see Duchamp's LHOOQ, where he puts a mustache on, I'm sorry, it's unfair for you to see my material. He puts a mustache on the Mona Lisa, hence rendering it to be of lesser value. But then we kind of jump ahead to the 1960s, where we've just gone through abstract expressionism, and then kind of the immediate objection or reaction to that in pop art. And then we see artists doing minimal work with almost nothing, and then even minimizing that concept down to just concept. And in fact, Saul LeWitt, who was doing line drawings on walls, but they would just be a series of instructions. And in fact, LeWitt says in paragraphs on conceptual art in Art Forum, June 1967, in conceptual art, the idea or concept is the most important aspect of the work. When an artist uses a conceptual form of art, it means that all of the planning and decisions are made beforehand, and the execution is a perfunctory affair. The idea becomes a machine that makes the art. Lawrence Weiner says in his paragraphs on conceptual art, the artist may construct the piece. The piece may be fabricated. The piece need not be built. Each being equal and consistent with the intent of the artist, the decision as to the condition rests with the receiver upon the occasion of receivership. And finally, in 1970, Mel Ochner, he does not like the epithet conceptual. It is not always entirely clear what concept ultimately refers to. It is important not to confuse what is referred to as conceptual with the artist's intention. Now, having read those and having shown you these works of art, I'd like to actually take exception with most of that, because New York conceptualism and West Coast conceptualism are entirely different. And in fact, West Coast conceptualism, like Bruce Nauman, Stephen Kaltenbach, is much more fluxus, and therefore doesn't have that kind of dry, really tough to swallow, pedantic kind of literature that I just read to you, but in fact does embrace the ideas about art and ideas about things, but also includes a great deal of fun in the process.
Yeah, well, I don't know too much about conceptual art, man, because I don't like it. But I do know this, that when an object is aesthetically pleasing, it affects your senses, your emotion, and your subconscious, bypassing the brain. In other words, you look at something, because it's aesthetically pleasing, all of a sudden this visual onslaught happens, and immediately you are affected in your subconscious, in your emotions especially, before the brain can make a judgment. This doesn't happen with conceptual art, because most of the time you look at it, you don't know what you're looking at. And the reason why is because you need to be taught. You need to be educated in what you're looking at, because they use logic, they use words, they use theory. If you're not educated, most of the time you don't know what's going on. And a byproduct of this is the fact that artists now grow up in, or they become artists in universities, as opposed to going out in the world and coming back with their own interpretation. And it's a deadening effect, because it's like, you know, in the medieval times when, you know, they would count how many angels on the head of a pin. It's what killed poetry. You stay in the university, and then one university reads poetry, the other one is just, It's very, I don't know, we call it insular or something like that. Anyway, because it's not for the uneducated masses, because it's exclusive, it depends on art critics and dealers to tell you if it's good or not. And therefore, what happens is, this is really kind of weird, and it's probably for the other discussion, but if the masses, you know, when Bernini, you know, took his wrappings off the sculpture, everybody, no matter how stupid they were really stupid things because they didn't go to school, they all went, oh, it's great. But this no longer happens. What happens is now the critics tell you what to do. So the market becomes very controlled. You don't have an emotional, you know, wacky kind of thing happening. And once it becomes controlled, then the money goes into it because they have financial security. And so all of a sudden the art market becomes the stock market with tons and tons of money. And then what happens is the person buys it just for investment. And the reason why I think our culture has this kind of art is because it's just consumerism, and we are, that's all we're about. You mentioned Duchamp. Duchamp, you know, he did this thing with the toilet, but I don't think he ever thought it was supposed to be art. It's merely an idea about art. I mean, how many living rooms do you go into and see a toilet? I mean, the only toilet I've ever seen in someone's living room was painted by Bacon. And Joseph Beuys is the same way. I mean, this man is a conceptual artist, but it's because he didn't want to have, he wanted to do something that they couldn't sell. It would have to be art. Only now they've learned how to sell whatever you do. I mean, you could, you know, take a ship in the little floor, they could sell it. So I have a problem with conceptual art.
Well, you make a good case, Mary, for actually not liking any art. And again, I'm not necessarily making a case for conceptual art, and that's why I try to put it in a historic perspective, is there was a period of time when people felt like they needed to have an ism. And I think maybe one of your former bosses, Andy Warhol, could address that in terms of, I mean, I think in the future maybe we'll have 15-minute isms, because right now if you look at people's work, like a Jeff Koons, for example, what is Jeff Koons? Is he a pop artist? Is he a conceptual artist? Is he a minimal artist? And I think what we see is this amazing kind of fusion of art where something is pop and it is conceptual and it is painting and it's not necessarily intellectual, and yet I don't even know how you separate all those out, but it goes beyond just personal opinion as to what makes something art.
Okay. First of all, I don't like pop art, but I did when I was with Warhol. Secondly, don't you think, and I hate to be a conspiracy theorist here, but don't you think that America has not done very well? I mean, first they took the image out of abstract art. Okay, that's gone. And then with pop art, instead of objectifying man and his struggles, you objectify only, you know, things made by man, a Brillo box, you know, so that's, you know, that's another thing gone. Oh, that's fine. And why are they doing all of this? And then we already mentioned conceptual art. Why are we doing all of this? I think maybe we're doing all this because the only thing we care about is money. And therefore, solidifying the art market more and more and more. What better way than to also take out, just get rid of art. Hey, anything can be art, but we decide what it is. This is the thing that I am against. As far as, you know, the names that you give to all of these things, you know, that's just a ruse. I'm just beyond that. America has not done very well, according to art. I mean, we've lost it.
America lost it because of art? Well, we could keep this going all night, I think. Well, I mean, I go back to my second premise, which is really that there's no ism. There's really hardly a way to distinguish what people do in terms of art as to what it is, what categories it falls in. Sculpture is painting, painting is sculpture. Everyone's an installation artist. So, but I mean, I guess I'm making a case for the fact that ideas do matter, and I think that ideas can be beautiful, and I think ideas can almost be poetry.
Ideas, yes. I mean, ideas are wonderful, but you know, in order to communicate them, you have to do something the other person relates to, so that you get your idea across. And the way in which it is done is classified, you know, one is novels, one is art. And I'm just saying that this country has, you know, every country gets to, you know, comment on how they're going to get their ideas across, and we just picked a very peculiar way, and I think it's because we're interested in money in the stock market. That's all.
Okay.
Do we keep it going?
Pro conceptual art is David Stone. Let's hear it for David. Against conceptual art is Mary.
Pencil next.